We begin the show with Democratic Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, a senior member of both the Senate Banking and Armed Services Committee. Senator, thank you for being with us.
Al.
Let's start off with the committee hearings on Jamie Dimon. You were there. Most press accounts say he came through unscathed. Were all of your questions answered, or do you think there ought to be more inquiries?
Well, I think there have to be very careful inquiries by the regulators. They have access to the documents, to all of the specific decisions. They can talk directly to the.
How about the Senate? Should the Senate do more?
Well, I think we should wait, but not indefinitely, but wait till we get a good readout from the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, from the Federal Reserve, from those who are charged with not only supervising but analyzing what happened. I think also, though, one of the things in response to my question that Mr. Dimon indicated that there is room for a vocal rule. It has to be drafted appropriately, and no one argues that. But if a good vocal rule was in place, my argument would be that they wouldn't have suffered $2 billion or more, maybe more, of direct losses and a significant loss in their shareholder equity.
The Republicans, of course, spent a lot of time talking about repealing Dodd-Frank at that hearing. Yeah. Was what happened, the hearing in J.P. Morgan, a setback to those efforts to repeal Dodd-Frank?
I think to a degree it was, but also, to give Mr. Dimon credit, he was very clear. He said, there are some parts of this bill that we supported.
Right.
And there were some that we didn't. So if they were looking for a wholesale sort of throw it all out, that didn't happen. And I think that was something that they didn't quite expect, that he would be clear that there are parts of the bill that are very necessary.
Right. Let's turn to another one of your areas of expertise, foreign policy in Syria. John McCain and others have said the carnage is so bad the U.S. has no choice but to intervene. Is this Barack Obama's Bosnia moment, and what's the best option?
Well, unfortunately, this is a very difficult situation where there very well might not be any great options. The situation has deteriorated. The Assad regime has lost any legitimacy in terms of their attacks against their own people. But I think you have to look very carefully at the cost also of intervention. What does that mean? Is that, taking down their air defense system, inserting troops on the ground? That is not without cost, both in terms of our personnel.
At this stage, you would oppose both of those actions?
I think that at this stage, we still have to, as frustrating and as painful, given some of the scenes we've seen, we have to pursue diplomacy. One of the key elements here is the Russians. They have long-time ties to the Syrian government, to the Assad family, not just the government. And I know we're working very hard to get them to recognize that this regime no longer is legitimate in the eyes of the world.
Senator, Secretary Clinton said this week, not only are they not helping, but they're actually helping Assad with weapons that kill people.
They have either they have introduced, or at least they're much more visible now, attack helicopters of Russian origin. Mm-hmm. It doesn't help. But we have undertaken interventions in the past that have proved to be extraordinarily expensive and in some cases counterproductive, I think. And so we have to be very, very careful. The issue in terms of is this the Bosnia, et cetera, there was a long process of diplomacy, of pulling together the United Nations. It was a United Nations effort. We positioned military forces, we did that, but when we went in, it was after exhausting every type of diplomatic
Do you think
approach.
There's any chance with diplomacy that Assad would go?
There is a chance. Again, it oscillates from day to day. They looked like a few weeks ago, it looked like there was a rejection of him. It's very complicated. I'm stating the obvious. There's another factor too about intervention in this case. There's no coherent, to the point, resistance force.
You mean internally?
Internally,
yeah, right.
There's a free Syrian army, et cetera. But in terms,
so we don't know what would happen.
In terms of a coherent opposition, also it looks like in terms of a coherent opposition that touches all of these sectarian groups. Right. That has not yet emerged yet. And then if you're going to conduct military operations, if it's the outsiders alone, the United Nations or a coalition of the willing, and you don't have an internal force that makes it all the more difficult.
Many Democrats were very critical of Bush Cheney for extra-legal actions, use of torture, warrantless monitoring of phones. How is President Obama's drone program, which the administration doesn't even admit exists, why isn't that a similar abuse of power?
I think it is something that, first of all, again, no one seems to acknowledge it, but it's obvious. It is targeted very particularly, very carefully against those individuals who have demonstrated a willingness to, engage us, attack us, plan attacks against us.
Mm-hmm.
It's a policy, and again, it's a policy that the president continued from President Bush, who began really those operations, particularly in Pakistan. I think both presidents thought that given an enemy that is committed to attacking us, is non-deterrable, can only be effectively countered by preemption, this is an appropriate way to preempt them.
Okay, final.
Now, I got to tell you,
Okay.
though, the cumulative effect of these attacks. I don't think we can be cavalier about it and just sort of say, well, there's, this is because in this world there's what comes around goes around in terms of justification for doing things. So I think we have to be careful, but, we've dealt a significant blow to terrorist networks by being able to deploy these weapon systems.
Let me ask you a final question. Governor Romney has proposed to increase the defense budget, $96 billion, I think next year, over $2 trillion over 10 years, because he said the president has put us on a course towards a hollow defense.
I do not agree. Secretary Panetta does not agree. Chairman Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, does not agree. Bob Gates started a process of cutting roughly $500 billion over about a 10-year period. After a significant increase in the defense budget because of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Governor Romney's...
First of all, I'd say, ask him how he's going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Because, frankly, the other issue here, and I think there's a growing realization that our strength as a nation rests upon our economy as well as our military prowess. So that's the first question. But we are in a situation now where, under the leadership of President Obama, but with the advice, in fact, the direction of Secretary Gates, now Secretary Panetta, the military leaders, they feel confident that the course we're on is an appropriate one that'll leave us able to defend our interests and frankly, overmatch our opponents.
Okay.
The question they worry about is, and we all do, is sequestration. What does that do to this plan? That's a whole different issue.
We will come back to talk about that sometime in the next 6 months. Senator Reid, thank you so much for being with us.